Know what is more dangerous than telling a lie? When an internet algorithm worth $1 billion decides to make it the truth, I just wanted a peaceful corporate life, so I invented a fictional husband to act as my shield. Then, that imaginary man began using real money, real power, and ruthless tactics to tear my world apart. The craziest part? He never even knew who I was until the FBI knocked on his door. Hello, everyone. Before today's story begins, we'd like to share a quick message. YouTube recently removed our monetization, cutting off our income. If you enjoy this story, we humbly ask for just $1 to help pay our staff so they can make a living and keep creating for you. Thank you for saving us. Now, let's begin the story. My name is Avery Barnes. I am a 29-year-old architect working at Vanguard Ascendant Architects in Seattle. Vanguard is the kind of firm where the espresso machines cost more than a junior designer's yearly salary, and the workplace culture is toxic enough to melt solid steel. Surviving here as a woman, especially an introverted one who just wants to do her job and go home, means navigating a daily minefield. There are pointless all-night networking mixers, mandatory team-building drinks that destroy your weekends, and the constant, slimy, unsolicited advances from senior partners who think a corner office gives them a pass to be entirely inappropriate. So, early on, I invented a human shield. I created a fake husband. I did not just say I was married. I crafted a specific narrative to shut down any further conversation. I told everyone in the office that I was married to a fiercely patriarchal, financially controlling man. It was the perfect, impenetrable deterrent. Whenever a partner invited me for late-night drinks, I had my line ready. Sorry, I cannot stay. My husband gets furiously angry if I'm not home by 7 o'clock. When asked to chip in $500 for a wealthy executive's ridiculous retirement gift, I would sigh heavily. I wish I could. But my husband holds the purse strings and monitors every single transaction. It worked like an absolute charm. People pitied me, left me alone, and let me focus entirely on my architectural blueprints. Fast forward to a dreary Tuesday afternoon. I was out scouting high-end interior materials with Chloe. Chloe is the kind of coworker who smiles warmly to your face while calculating the exact angle to plant a knife in your back. She is fiercely competitive, constantly trying to steal credit for my designs, and deeply envious of my talent. We were browsing an upscale boutique downtown when I saw it. It was a pristine, vintage drafting table crafted from solid walnut with brass fittings. It was a functional piece of art. I ran my fingers over the smooth wood, completely captivated. Then I looked at the price tag. $15,000. I lingered by it a second too long, and Chloe immediately pounced like a predator smelling blood. You should buy it, Avery, she purred, her voice dripping with fake support. A top architect like you deserves the absolute best tools. Go on, treat yourself. She knew exactly what my salary was. She knew I could not afford a $15,000 piece of furniture. I deployed my usual, foolproof defense mechanism, adopting a perfectly rehearsed look of wifely resignation. I really wish I could, I sighed, shaking my head. But my husband would completely lose his mind if I swiped my card for this. He keeps a very tight leash on our finances, down to the last penny. Chloe smirked, clearly satisfied with my pathetic domestic situation, and we moved on. The next morning, at exactly 8:45, the elevator doors pinged open on the 14th floor. I walked into the open-plan office and stopped dead in my tracks. Sitting right in the middle of my cubicle was the vintage drafting table. $15,000 of exquisite craftsmanship, right there under the harsh fluorescent lights of Vanguard Ascendant. Sitting squarely on the leather surface was a thick cream-colored card printed in cold, automated text. I picked it up, my hands trembling. It read, "For my beloved wife, do not let anyone put a price on your passion, your husband." My blood turned to ice. I stared at the card. I stared at the table. I was 29 years old. I lived alone with 2 indoor plants. I had never been married in my entire life. I practically dove under my desk, hiding from view as I frantically opened the banking app on my phone. I checked my checking account, my savings, my credit cards. I checked everything twice. Not a single cent had been deducted. The balance was exactly as depressing as I had left it the night before. Suddenly, Chloe materialized beside my desk. Her eyes darted from the magnificent table to the pale, terrified expression on my face. "Wow," she said, crossing her arms. Her voice was sharp with venomous curiosity. "I thought you said he was incredibly strict with money. What exactly does this mysterious husband of yours do for a living? Avery? You never talk about him." I stammered out some vague, disjointed nonsense about offshore tech investments and quickly changed the subject, my heart hammering furiously against my ribs. I spent the rest of the day in a state of absolute paranoia. I thought that would be the end of it. I tried to convince myself it was a bizarre, singular prank, perhaps a shipping error that coincidentally matched my lie. I was horribly wrong. 4 days later, my phone rang. It was my younger brother, Leo. Leo runs a struggling carpentry shop on the edge of town. He is always stressed about money, barely making rent most months. When I answered the phone, he was hyperventilating. "Avery," he gasped, his voice cracking. "My business bank account. I just received a massive, anonymous wire transfer." "How much?" I asked, a heavy, suffocating sense of dread pooling in my stomach. $250,000, Leo shouted through the speaker. And the transfer note attached to it says, "Barnes Family Support Fund from brother-in-law." The floor seemed to drop out from beneath my feet. $250,000, a $15,000 table, a non-existent husband throwing around unimaginable wealth like it was pocket change. My introverted, logical mind went into overdrive, spiraling into absolute terror. Who was doing this? Was I being targeted by an international money laundering syndicate? Had a high-tech criminal organization stolen my identity, deciding to use me as a digital money mule to clean their dirty cash? I was no longer just a quiet architect avoiding office drama. I was officially caught in the crosshairs of something massive, illegal, and utterly terrifying. I could not simply sit in my apartment and wait for federal authorities or dangerous criminals to kick my door down. I needed answers, and I needed them immediately. I reached out to Marcus, a former college roommate who now worked as a high-level cybersecurity contractor for independent tech firms. I lied and told him my phone was acting strangely, hoping he could find a simple malware virus. We sat in my dimly lit living room with the curtains drawn tight. He connected my laptop and smartphone to his encrypted diagnostic deck. For an hour, the room was silent, except for the frantic clicking of his keyboard. Then, Marcus stopped. He stared at his primary monitor, the color completely draining from his face. He told me that my devices were not just infected with a standard virus. They were being systematically invaded and scraped by a digital entity operating at a terrifying military-grade capacity. He explained that every single text message I had sent, every social media post I had ever liked, my daily location data, my voice notes, and my late-night browser search histories were being aggressively harvested. This autonomous system was not stealing my passwords. It was constructing an intricate psychological and financial profile of my entire existence. It was actively analyzing my fake complaints about a controlling husband. Somehow, this invisible machine was taking my fabricated stories and building a tangible reality out of my digital footprint. Back at Vanguard Ascendant, the atmosphere grew increasingly suffocating, transforming my workplace into a psychological torture chamber. Chloe had shifted from a petty, jealous rival into a quiet, observant predator. She noticed the expensive drafting table, and more importantly, she noticed the genuine terror hiding behind my eyes. Instead of dropping the subject, she began orchestrating elaborate situations specifically designed to test the financial limits of my invisible husband. She would intentionally book extravagant client lunches at exclusive restaurants that required massive, non-refundable deposits, forcing me into a corner where I had to feign hesitation and claim I needed to clear the expense with my spouse. Exactly 2 hours later, the restaurant management would call our office to confirm that an anonymous, premium corporate card had already covered the entire tab in advance, including an astronomical gratuity. Whenever this happened, Chloe would smile her venomous, knowing smile. I would catch her taking meticulous notes on her phone, quietly recording the names of courier services, the exact delivery times of mysterious packages, and the metadata on any digital receipts that inadvertently crossed my desk. I felt like a laboratory rat trapped in a transparent glass maze, constantly watched by an omnipotent machine from above and hunted by a ruthless colleague right beside me. I was losing my mind, jumping at shadows and dreading the sound of my own ringtone. The absolute breaking point arrived on my birthday. It was the 23rd of October. I woke up at exactly 6 o'clock in the morning to a sharp, insistent alert chiming from my secure banking app. It was not a notification for a local flower delivery or an overpriced bakery pastry. It was a notification for a confirmed, fully cleared international wire transfer. I sat up in bed, staring at the glowing screen, my vision violently blurring. The number had too many zeros. I counted them over and over again, praying my tired eyes were deceiving me. It was exactly $5 million. Attached to the staggering sum in the transaction notes was a complex, 10-digit alphanumeric string, identifying itself as a routing code for an undisclosed blind trust. The air vanished from my bedroom. I could barely breathe. The invisible walls of my digital cage were physically crushing my ribs. $5 million was not a generous birthday gift. $5 million was a one-way ticket to a federal penitentiary. I refused to wait to be arrested. I gathered every printed bank statement, every photograph of the lavish delivered items, and my heavily compromised mobile phone. I drove straight to the Federal Bureau of Investigation field office in downtown Seattle. I sat alone in a sterile, freezing interrogation room, my hands shaking violently as I pushed a thick manila envelope across the cold metal table to a stoic, gray-haired field agent. I told him absolutely everything. I confessed to the pathetic workplace lie, the phantom husband I had invented to avoid harassment, and the sudden, terrifying influx of unexplained wealth. I begged him to believe that I was a victim, a clueless pawn being framed as a digital money mule for a massive criminal enterprise. The agent listened in absolute unnerving silence. He opened my file, pulled out the printed document containing the mysterious trust fund code from my bank statement, and turned slowly to his secure computer terminal. He typed the 10 digits into the federal financial database. Instantly, the entire atmosphere of the room shattered. The agent's monitor flashed a blaring solid red light. The screen displayed a severe national security lockdown protocol. The agent's demeanor instantly transformed from bored bureaucratic indifference to a state of high-alert tactical response. He stood up abruptly, his metal chair scraping violently against the linoleum floor. He drew his standard-issue firearm, aiming the black barrel directly at the center of my chest. He barked a deafening order for me to keep my hands flat on the table, not to move a single muscle, and grabbed his shoulder radio to urgently summon his superiors. Before I could even scream or process the fact that a gun was pointed at my heart, the heavy steel door of the interrogation room swung violently open. A man stepped inside, flanked by 3 impeccably dressed corporate lawyers. He wore a razor-sharp black suit. He was tall. His jaw was rigidly clenched, and his dark eyes burned with an icy, unadulterated, murderous rage. He looked at me as if he wanted to tear my flesh from my bones with his bare hands. He walked right past the armed agent, slammed both of his hands down onto the metal table. Leaning in so close I could feel the heat radiating from his fury. "You are the one who hacked into the Vance Asset Trust and siphoned my money for the past month?" The man glaring at me was Declan Vance. He was 34 years old, famously reclusive, and the architect of some of the most impenetrable digital security infrastructures on the planet. I recognized him from the rare, grainy photographs published in financial magazines. Now, this billionaire phantom was standing in a federal interrogation room, accusing me of orchestrating a masterclass cyber heist. "I have spent 3 weeks hunting the ghost who bypassed 72 layers of encrypted firewalls," Declan snarled, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. You fabricated a completely synthetic digital identity to drain the blind trust established by my late father. Tell me how you bypassed the biometric locks." The sheer absurdity of his accusations snapped me out of my paralyzing fear. My panic instantaneously crystallized into boiling anger. I was not a criminal mastermind. I was an exhausted architect who just wanted to be left alone. "I do not even know how to reset my office router," I fired back, my voice rising as I grabbed the thick manila folder I had brought with me. I slammed it down onto the metal table with a deafening crack. "I came here to confess. I am the victim here. Your deranged security system stalked me, bought me a $15,000 desk, funded my brother with $250,000, and then dumped $5 million into my checking account this morning. I did not ask for a single penny. Your system forced me into becoming your digital wife." Declan stared at me, his icy composure fracturing for a fraction of a second. He looked at my file, then at his lead attorney. For the next 4 hours, the interrogation room transformed into a chaotic command center. The federal agent holstered his weapon, replaced by a swarm of cybercrime specialists and Declan's elite legal team. They hooked their encrypted laptops into the federal mainframe, aggressively dissecting the core algorithms governing the Vance Asset Trust. The air was thick with tension and rapid-fire technical jargon. Finally, Declan's chief technology officer, a woman with sharp glasses and a permanent scowl, pulled up a cascading wall of green code on the primary monitor. She let out a long, heavy sigh that sounded like absolute defeat. "She is telling the truth, Declan," the officer announced, her voice echoing in the cramped room. "It is not a hack. It is the Family First Protocol." Declan's face drained of all color. "My father swore he deactivated that subroutine before he died." "He did not," the lawyer interjected, adjusting his tie nervously. "He buried it deep within an immutable blockchain smart contract. The parameters were simple. The trust would only release the bulk of your inheritance upon your marriage. The system was designed to autonomously verify your marital status." The chief technology officer pointed at the screen. "We recently acquired a massive data brokerage firm to enhance our internal security grids. When we integrated their servers, we caused a massive memory overflow error. The Family First algorithm panicked, bypassed its normal verification protocols, and started desperately scraping the open internet to fulfill its primary directive. It went looking for your wife." Declan turned to me, bewildered. "But why her? We have never even met." "Because I lied," I said, the bitter irony tasting like ash in my mouth. "To keep creepy executives away from me at work, I created a very detailed, consistent digital narrative. I texted my friends about my strict husband. I searched for marital advice on my work computer to make the lie look authentic. I complained on private forums about a wealthy, controlling spouse." The algorithm read her digital footprint, the technology officer concluded. It saw a woman complaining about a wealthy, secretive husband and cross-referenced the financial timelines. The machine's logic gates concluded that Avery Barnes was your unlisted, secret wife. It then executed the secondary directive of the trust. It moved to protect her, provide for her, and ensure her absolute financial independence from any outside threats. The machine thought it was doing exactly what your father programmed it to do. A heavy, suffocating silence descended upon the room. Declan Vance, the untouchable tech god, slowly sank into a plastic chair. He ran a hand over his face. We were not enemies. We were two completely innocent bystanders caught in the gears of a dead man's broken machine. "So, we just shut it down," I said, desperately wanting to go home. "You take your money back, and I go back to drafting floor plans." "We cannot," Declan replied, his voice completely hollow. "It is a smart contract locked by my father's digital will. If we force a manual shutdown without fulfilling the legal parameters, the entire trust liquidates and donates every single asset to charity. Billions of dollars will vanish." Before I could process the magnitude of that statement, the federal agent stepped back into the room. He did not look relieved. In fact, he looked even more grim than when he first pulled his gun on me. "We have a much bigger problem than a confused algorithm," the agent announced, throwing a fresh printout onto the table. "Our cyber division just flagged a massive anomaly. While the trust was busy sending Miss Barnes millions of dollars, someone else noticed the firewall was down. A third party has been quietly siphoning Declan Vance's private financial data, his proprietary source codes, and the structural blueprints of his security systems, and selling them piecemeal on the dark web." Declan stood up, his posture instantly rigid. "Who? Where is the leak coming from?" The agent looked directly at me. "We traced the IP address of the data smuggler. It is a direct match. The leak is coming from inside Vanguard Ascendant Architects. Someone in your office, Miss Barnes, is using your machine-generated wealth as a smokescreen to rob Mr. Vance blind." There was no way out, but straight through the fire. Declan and I forged a reluctant, desperate alliance right there in the federal building. He looked at me with a grim intensity and explained that we had to maintain the illusion. "If we publicly deny the marriage now, the algorithm will register a breach of contract and trigger a 100% liquidation," he warned, his voice tight with frustration. "My engineering team needs exactly 72 hours to carefully dismantle the code from the inside without triggering the financial failsafes. You have to keep playing the part of my wife, smile for the cameras, wear the clothes, and pretend we are deeply in love." I agreed, but our plan was immediately intercepted by a much darker reality unfolding back at my office. I had always known Chloe was a toxic, jealous colleague, but I had severely underestimated the depth of her malice. She was not just trying to steal credit for my designs. Chloe was a highly paid industrial spy. For the past 6 months, she had been systematically infiltrating Vanguard Ascendant's secure servers, downloading highly classified structural blueprints, and selling them to our largest overseas competitors. She was the security leak the federal agents had detected. While monitoring my network traffic to cover her own tracks, Chloe discovered the glaring anomalies in my sudden influx of wealth. She pieced together the digital breadcrumbs and realized that the controlling husband I had complained about was nothing more than a glitch in a billionaire's security network. Recognizing the explosive value of this information, she immediately reached out to the one person who could weaponize it. She contacted Eleanor Vance. Eleanor was Declan's older half-sister and his most ruthless corporate rival. She had spent the last 15 years bitterly trying to wrestle control of the Vance empire away from him. When Chloe handed her the digital proof that Declan's systems were bleeding millions of dollars to a random architect based on a fabricated internet profile, Eleanor saw her golden opportunity. She did not just want to embarrass her brother, she wanted to annihilate him. Within 24 hours, Eleanor's elite legal team filed a devastating, sealed petition in federal court. They did not accuse Declan of negligence. They accused him of profound mental collapse. Eleanor submitted documents claiming her brother was suffering from severe, untreatable schizophrenia. Her narrative was utterly chilling. She told the judge that Declan had completely lost his grip on reality, that he was actively hallucinating a wife who did not exist, and that he was blindly throwing away the family fortune to a complete stranger in a state of deep psychosis. She demanded an immediate, indefinite medical conservatorship that would grant her absolute control over every single asset he owned. Simultaneously, Chloe executed a flawless, vicious smear campaign against me to destroy my credibility before I could ever testify. She weaponized the office gossip mill and professional networking platforms. Overnight, my carefully constructed professional reputation was violently torn apart. Chloe seeded anonymous posts claiming I was a predatory, shameless gold digger. The vicious rumors mutated wildly, eventually settling on a fabricated story that I had orchestrated a fake pregnancy to trap a vulnerable, mentally unstable tech mogul. The fallout was instantaneous and brutal. At 9 o'clock the next morning, the board of directors at Vanguard Ascendant summoned me into the main conference room. They did not ask for my side of the story. They handed me a formal notice of indefinite suspension, citing gross violations of ethical conduct and severe damage to the firm's public image. A security guard escorted me to my desk. watched me pack a single cardboard box, and deactivated my access badge in front of the entire floor. Chloe stood by the water cooler, sipping her coffee, watching me leave with a look of absolute, triumphant satisfaction. The nightmare quickly spilled over and infected the only family I had left. Hungry tabloid journalists and aggressive financial reporters swarmed my brother's carpentry shop like a flock of starving vultures. They blocked the narrow street with broadcasting vans, shoved blinding camera flashes into Leo's face, and aggressively interrogated his few remaining customers. The relentless harassment shattered his fragile business operations. By 3 o'clock that afternoon, Leo called me, his voice shaking with helpless rage, to say he had been forced to lock the doors, pull down the heavy metal shutters, and temporarily close the shop. I sat alone in my dark apartment, completely backed into a corner. My career was incinerated. My dignity was a public joke. My brother was suffering because of my mess. Eleanor and Chloe had stripped away everything I valued, leaving me with nothing but a crushing sense of injustice and a burning, undeniable thirst for retaliation. I am an architect. I do not run from collapsing structures. I study their stress points. I sat across from Declan in my dimly lit living room, tracing the rim of my coffee mug. Eleanor and Chloe had pushed me out of my own life, expecting me to vanish into the shadows and cry. But they made a fatal miscalculation. They assumed I was just a frightened bystander. They did not realize that I design things for a living, and I know exactly how to tear them down. I looked at Declan, my voice devoid of any remaining fear, and said, "We are no longer playing defense. We need a demolition blueprint. We are going to build a trap so perfectly aligned with their own greed that they will gleefully walk right into it and pull the trigger themselves." The plan started with a meticulously crafted piece of bait, even though I had been unceremoniously suspended. Vanguard Ascendant's notoriously incompetent information technology department had neglected to instantly wipe the synchronized corporate email server from my personal tablet. I had exactly a tiny window of access left before the system updated. I drafted an aggressively unsecured, completely unencrypted email from my corporate address and sent it directly to Declan. In the body of the text, I adopted the frantic persona of a panicking, greedy wife. I typed furiously, "Why is the autonomous algorithm preparing to transfer $50 million into that secret Swiss bank account by the end of the week? You told me that money was hidden." I made sure to include a fake routing number and a highly conspicuous set of administrative login credentials. It was the digital equivalent of leaving a heavy bank vault door wide open in the middle of the street. Just as we anticipated, Chloe was still obsessively monitoring my old network traffic, hunting for the final piece of evidence to put in my coffin. She saw the unencrypted transmission. She intercepted the email, her eyes undoubtedly widening at the prospect of $50 million in untraceable offshore funds. She immediately downloaded the server logs and forwarded the entire package to Eleanor Vance. Eleanor took the bait hook, line, and sinker. She now had what she firmly believed was the ultimate, irrefutable proof of Declan's total financial negligence and my own criminal intent. She immediately instructed her legal team to submit the intercepted email as the absolute cornerstone of her upcoming conservatorship hearing. They were utterly convinced they had won the war. While Chloe was busy congratulating herself on her corporate espionage, I was quietly moving through the backdoor protocols of Vanguard's architectural database. Since Chloe had previously used my workstation's internet protocol address to mask her own data smuggling, I knew exactly which digital pathways to trace backwards. For 3 agonizingly long nights, I sifted through thousands of lines of hidden directory caches. I finally isolated the specific, encrypted packets containing the core structural blueprints she had stolen. I found the digital receipts linking her private checking accounts to our largest overseas competitors. I meticulously compiled every single timestamp, every unauthorized download, and every illegal wire transfer, sealing them all into a heavily encrypted, undeniable digital dossier. Chloe had tried to frame me, but she had carelessly left her own muddy footprints all over the crime scene. Meanwhile, Declan unleashed the full, terrifying power of his own technological empire. He was no longer trying to stop his rogue algorithm. He was using his massive servers to actively hunt his sister. He deployed a swarm of advanced financial tracking programs to trace the money Eleanor was quietly bleeding from her numerous shell companies. Within 48 hours, his systems illuminated a massive, undeniable web of corruption. Eleanor had been systematically wiring hundreds of thousands of dollars in offshore bribes to the federal judge presiding over the conservatorship case. She had also paid off 3 key members of the Vanguard Ascendant Board of Directors to ensure my swift and public termination. Declan captured every single transactional ledger, mirroring the damning evidence onto an immutable, decentralized cloud platform. No matter what happened, Eleanor could never delete the proof. Her bribes were etched into the digital bedrock forever. With the trap fully armed and the explosives quietly wired, it was time to invite our guests to the detonation. We spared absolutely no expense. I commissioned a high-end printing press to produce hundreds of thick, gold-embossed invitations. The elegant calligraphy proudly announced a lavish, highly exclusive gala, celebrating the first wedding anniversary of Declan Vance and Avery Barnes. We rented out the grand ballroom of the most opulent luxury hotel in downtown Seattle. We mailed the invitations to every major financial journalist, every vicious gossip columnist, and the entire executive leadership team of Vanguard Ascendant architects. Finally, I personally ensured that 2 very specific invitations were hand-delivered by private couriers. One went directly to the desk of Chloe at my former office. The other went straight to the penthouse suite of Eleanor Vance. We knew their sheer arrogance would never allow them to decline. They would come to the party expecting to publicly humiliate us and claim their ultimate victory. They had no idea they were walking directly onto the scaffold we had built just for them. The crystal chandeliers of the grand emerald ballroom cast a brilliant, fractured light over a sea of designer gowns, tailored tuxedos, and the sharp, flashing lenses of the local media. Waitstaff glided silently across the marble floors, offering flutes of imported champagne to the elite crowd. Every high-ranking executive from Vanguard Ascendant Architects was present, mingling nervously with tech journalists and financial analysts. It was the social event of the season, a lavish celebration of my supposedly perfect first wedding anniversary with Declan Vance. Standing near the towering ice sculpture at the center of the room, I watched the heavy oak doors. Right on cue, Eleanor Vance swept into the ballroom, her chin held high, radiating absolute, venomous confidence. Trailing closely behind her like an obedient shadow was Chloe, wearing a smug, victorious grin that made my blood boil. They thought they were the apex predators walking into a pen of helpless sheep. They had no idea the doors locking behind them were the jaws of a steel trap. An hour into the reception, just as the string quartet finished their opening set, Eleanor did exactly what we knew she would do. She did not wait for a formal introduction. She marched directly up to the main stage, aggressively snatched the microphone from the bewildered master of ceremonies, and turned to face the hushed, confused crowd. Behind her, a massive digital projection screen, meant for a romantic photo slideshow, spanned the entire back wall. "Ladies and gentlemen," Eleanor projected, her voice echoing perfectly off the vaulted acoustic ceilings, "we are gathered here tonight under a grotesque and tragic pretense. I step forward not as a corporate rival, but as a heartbroken sister. My brother, Declan Vance, is suffering from a profound, unchecked mental collapse. He has completely lost his grip on reality. He has fabricated a delusion. And this woman, Avery Barnes, is a criminal opportunist feeding on his sickness to drain the Vance family trust." A collective gasp rippled through the elegant crowd. Camera flashes erupted in a blinding strobe effect. Chloe stood in the front row, crossing her arms, her smile widening into a sinister smirk. "I did not come here with empty accusations," Eleanor continued, holding up a small silver remote control. "I came with absolute, undeniable proof of Miss Barnes attempting to funnel $50 million into a secret offshore account just 3 days ago." Eleanor pressed the button on the remote with a dramatic flourish. The giant screen behind her blazed to life, but it did not display my fabricated, unencrypted email. The digital feed was completely hijacked, directly synced to Declan's secure servers. The screen flashed a bright crimson warning before displaying a massive, meticulously categorized financial ledger. The crowd went completely silent. On the towering screen, perfectly legible for every journalist and executive to see, was Chloe's face next to a comprehensive list of her private bank routing numbers. Below her picture was a real-time, scrolling history of every single highly classified architectural blueprint she had illegally downloaded from Vanguard Ascendant, side by side with the massive wire transfers she had received from foreign competitors. Before Eleanor could even process the disastrous image, the slide transitioned automatically. The screen now displayed Eleanor's own complex web of illegal shell companies. It highlighted, in glowing yellow ink, the exact dates and the hundreds of thousands of dollars she had wired directly into the private accounts of the federal judge presiding over her conservatorship case, as well as the secret bribes paid to 3 members of Vanguard's board of directors, who were currently standing in the room, sweating profusely in their expensive suits. I calmly walked up the short flight of stairs to the stage. I stood next to a completely paralyzed Eleanor, gently pulled the microphone from her rigid, trembling fingers, and looked out at the sea of shocked faces. "I believe you brought the wrong presentation to our anniversary party, Eleanor," I said, my voice completely steady and cold as ice. I turned my gaze down to the front row, locking eyes with Chloe, whose smug smile had instantly vanished, replaced by an expression of absolute suffocating terror. That so-called secret Swiss bank account I emailed Declan about? It never existed. It was a digital honeypot, an isolated trap engineered by the Federal Bureau of Investigation, specifically designed to catch the rat hiding in my office. And you, Chloe, walked right into it, dragging Eleanor down with you. Right on cue, the heavy oak doors at the back of the ballroom violently burst open. The gray-haired federal agent from my interrogation, flanked by a dozen heavily armed tactical officers, marched straight into the silent room. The crowd parted like the Red Sea. They bypassed the bewildered guests and walked directly up to Chloe. The sharp, metallic click of handcuffs snapping around her wrists echoed loudly in the cavernous ballroom. "Avery, please!" Chloe screamed, her voice cracking as the officers forcefully spun her around. Tears of pure panic streamed down her carefully contoured face, ruining her makeup. "Tell them it is a misunderstanding. I was just following orders, please. I am so sorry." I looked down at her, feeling absolutely nothing but a profound, satisfying emptiness. "You tried to put a price tag on my entire life, Chloe. Now the federal government is going to price your bail." The agents hauled a sobbing Chloe out of the room for commercial espionage and federal fraud. On stage, Eleanor was hyperventilating, desperately trying to call her lawyers, but her phone had already been remotely deactivated by Declan's security team. Her entire empire had evaporated in less than 3 minutes. She had lost every ounce of her credibility, was immediately ousted by her horrified board of directors, and was now facing a guaranteed 15 years in a federal penitentiary for bribery, market manipulation, and judicial corruption. The chaotic storm finally passed. Weeks later, the federal criminal case officially closed. Declan's elite engineering team successfully dismantled the broken algorithm without triggering the financial failsafes. Billions of dollars were secured. My name was completely cleared. Vanguard Ascendant desperately offered me a senior partnership and double my previous salary to return, but I proudly told them to lose my number. I was standing in the back of my brother's carpentry shop on a quiet Tuesday afternoon. The relentless media circus was gone, and the heavy metal shutters were finally rolled up, letting the warm Seattle sunlight pour over the sawdust-covered floor. I was sketching a new, independent architectural design when I heard heavy footsteps approaching. I turned around. It was Declan Vance. He was not wearing a sharp, intimidating suit. He was not flanked by elite security guards or corporate lawyers. He wore faded jeans and a simple cotton shirt. He walked over to a workbench, picked up a heavy electric sander, and examined the wood grain with genuine interest. He set the tool down, dusted off his hands, and looked at me with a soft, incredibly warm smile that completely erased the cold billionaire persona. "Well," Declan said softly, the tension completely gone from his broad shoulders. "Now that my father's deranged algorithm is no longer forcing us to be together, and you do not have to pretend to be my wife to save my life, do you want to try getting a simple cup of coffee with a real man?" I looked at him, feeling a genuine warmth blossom in my chest. I smiled, closed my sketchbook, and nodded. My desperate, completely fabricated lie to survive a toxic office had accidentally triggered the most chaotic nightmare of my life. Yet, as I walked out of the shop next to Declan, I realized that the greatest digital error in history had ultimately brought me the most genuine, undeniable truth I had ever known. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. We hope you enjoyed it. As an ad-free channel, your support is what keeps us alive. Please support Violet Revenge Stories with just $1 via the QR code on the screen, or click the link in the description box or pinned comment. Also, we'd love to connect with you. Please leave a comment telling us which city or state you're listening from. Thank you for standing with us, and see you in the next stories.